Okay. Where's Commissioner Vogler? I haven't seen him for a while.
Mr. Hogler got in a truck and drove away at the first break. Chairman, I haven't seen him return.
Okay. Next agenda item. The big burn? Commissioner Strong? Okay, I think the appropriate action if a commissioner needs to leave, that maybe just ask to be excused by the chair is probably the appropriate procedure. So anyway, we'll, I don't want to comment because I don't know where or why he left. Next agenda item, informational item, Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies Annual Conference. Former Chairman Raine and Secretary Mayor.
Go ahead. You're first.
I'm first. It's one thing about WAFA, it's all about the directors. All right, went up to the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies meeting. One thing about it, it is all about the directors. It's run by the directors. All the things that are passed, it's all through them. You know, and it has some very good points and some downright really bad points. I'll try to cover them all in hopefully equal measure. We'll throw down. And there was a bunch of meetings I went to. I spent a couple days at commissioners' committees. Went over a bunch of items. I'll kind of run through those. Had some really good information. Mostly spoke about, had presentations and spoke a lot about mule deer and wolves. Wolves are a big deal. Sage grouse also to a lesser degree. Now, throughout probably the worst item, I know that it's interesting when you're talking in the commissioners meeting, it really comes out is that it does, one thing about WAFA is you got to watch out is it is an avenue that gives special interest groups really easy access to directly influence state directors. There's a whole bunch of invitation-only events sponsored by special interest groups. And that's the one thing I know when speaking to events, it really looks bad. And talking with former state directors, it's interesting, there was two of them there and they both had the idea, you know, those things are really bad, you know, because they're an open invitation to corruption. And that's the one portion that really can look bad. Who knows how those things go on. Anyways, that was probably the worst. Now, good stuff. There was a bunch of commissioners show up, and it's interesting getting in a room with 20 some odd different commissioners. At different days, it was different amounts, 28 or 9 one day, and about 22 another day, and a few of them were coming and going. But there was a huge amount of unanimity amongst the commissioners there. I mean, it was a room you almost couldn't get in an argument in, which was strange with that many people. There was a tremendous amount of unanimity on a lot of subjects, a lot of similar frustrations amongst commissioners, despite the fact that each of the agencies, each of the states, really run differently. You know, and also there's a bunch of Canadian provinces and involved as well, but none of those were representative there, at least at the commissioner meetings. But you know, the states have things like about half of them roughly directly hire and fire their directors. Others have Senate approval for their, you know, they hire them, but there's Senate approval. A lot of them are approved by the state senates, the commissioners themselves, and there's other variations as well. So there's a lot of really different dynamic within different commissions. So and so a lot of them are really, you know, united, and some of them have other issues. And a lot of them have known about a lot of Nevada's issues. It's rather interesting that 7 of the different commissioners that were there had actually read the press release that NDOW put out, basically talking smack, criticizing the commission. And you know, after the May 2011 meeting, and it was interesting to hear the different responses from them, because it actually came quite a topic of conversation. And I was kind of taking notes on that. And the responses varied between, did the director fire the people responsible for that? We would have fired the director. We would have fired whoever wrote it and the director. And one of them was we would have fired the. Anyways, they different. You know, none of them. Like, you know, that stuff is not to be tolerated. That was a very interesting point, and that was before I even had, I didn't even say anything about it. It's like, I hear this, you got this issue going on. Yep. That is it's some interesting politics, and basically here in Nevada, you don't hear a lot about what's going on in some of these other states, but they've been hearing, they've been getting the grapevine, and they kind of know where things are going. In the meetings, it was interesting to see that, and I'll just kind of go over, basically, we had over a mule deer populations recovery and overview that went on for a while. We had Idaho's experiences, Montana, Colorado, Utah all gave presentations on where they're going with the mule deer populations and what they're doing, and then we went a lot into the wolf issue. I'll kind of avoid the wolf issue because, we're there, it's really important, but legislatively, we're kind of our own little world compared to most of them. They've got active wolf populations where we were just kind of on the edge of it. But the mule deer, the science is really interesting. And you look at like Utah's mule deer recovery program, and actually it would actually go for all of those states. If you look at the top 3 items in the mule deer management plans that the commission has put forward there, predation control, for example, is in the top 3 of each one of the states' proposals of those that gave presentations. And that was kind of an interesting deal. Some of them, and the way they went about that was rather interesting. We also talked a lot about carrying capacity issues, and perhaps, the staff expert there, it was from Idaho, Todd Woodrow, one of the quotes that he put was, carrying capacity is an issue that's really tough because it's a moving target. It can change from moment to moment, one fire, one snow, change dramatically. And there's a lot of talk along that line, and also that it is generally utilized, and and this has come out of his speech as well as a couple others, that it's utilized way too often as an excuse, which was rather interesting because it's next to impossible to measure under a lot of circumstances. It can be estimated, and there was some interesting methodologies for estimations, but a lot of those are based strictly upon historical animal numbers, which was rather interesting. Also, the models that are utilized, different ways of measuring mule deer populations, was rather interesting. And probably the one that intrigued me the most, I believe, was the Colorado model, because that's one of the things I've been the biggest critic of and trying to study and trying to figure out is, what do you do? What is you do about this model? What is the best way to tell how many deer we've got? And they use a series, instead of a single spreadsheet model, they use a series of them utilizing different assumptions. And they're talking about 4 generally separate models, and they run them all using, of course, the same inputs, but they're using different assumptions rather than just picking a set of assumptions. And from the general discussion, it sounds like they're somewhat similar to Nevada's. They're different, but in the general spreadsheet model, similar to Nevada, they're similar. And then they basically pick out which one that they feel best reflects the results that match on the ground observations. Rather than picking your model and following it and trying to make it match the on the ground observations, they have a series of them and then go with the one that best matches it. And the methodology for that is interesting. They do, and this is done actually in a couple states, is they'll pick areas, and every 3 to 5 years they do a really intensive study in a relatively small area, and then they check and independent, supposedly by different members. Some of the bigger agencies in Nevada, so they use totally different people, and they come up with a deer estimate in those areas, and they say this is how many deer we should have, and then they check that back and compare that to model to give it a grounding to the model. And that was an interesting concept that if I had to bring back one recommendation would be is, let's use our model, great, maybe even think on running it with a few different variations and then bringing all the different variations of the assumptions put into it, and then bring them all to the commission and kind of explain the differences. And then having separate people through separate methodology do a check. Whether it's an intense, pick a unit, and that's best for the department or whoever, how it's easiest or it's best, the biologists figure it out. and then use that to measure your model and see how good your model is doing. Because that's what a lot of the states seem to be leaning towards, rather than the one model methodology. And one of the things I've always looked at our model, and we've got confidence intervals at plus or minus 20%, and I asked a bunch of questions of basically each of the different presenters. What's confidence? What kind of confidence do you have? Most, we don't even try to enumerate the number. They're guesses. The models are wild guesses, and that was one thing that I found refreshing, perhaps, is that, this is a wild guess, but it's our best wild guess, and we'll throw it out there in those words. And that's, I like honesty in all aspects, and that was just plain honest, and hey, if that's the best you can do, and that's our best guess, then let's say it's a guess, and rather than the quantification that, oh, this is true. And that's one thing I kind of dislike a little maybe about the way we're doing things in Nevada, is that, we're using it as too fixed of a number. We have too much confidence in a model that likely is inaccurate. It has to be inaccurate by its nature. Not necessarily that other people come up with better ones, but then you're looking at these different approaches to the multi-model approach. It's probably maybe a little more reasonable, and hopefully we can look at that in the future as a way of doing it. What else was going on here? I made a few extra notes here. So there's a lot going on there, and it was interesting though that in the general approaches that you see in the different commissioners, they're really unanimous in that, in most states, most commissioners say, we've got way too many studies going on. We're not taking enough action on a lot of things, and that's their main frustration that I saw overall. Too much study, not enough action. And it seemed to sound rather, a lot like we've seen at home. A lot of them are doing, and one thing that was brought up, of course it's a big deal, here, and it's been a big deal in the commission, we've talked about a lot, is the methodologies for predation control, and it's interesting, they've all coming out with similar methods to what we've talked about here, is highly concentrated. Most of them are specifically targeting coyotes. That's their general biggest thing that they are doing. And they're talking highly concentrated, utilizing airplanes, helicopters, ground trapping a lot in very concentrated areas. A lot of them, like for instance, I was throughout Idaho as an example, is that they have $450,000 that actually doesn't come out of $3 fee, that comes straight out of the general fund. It comes out of the regular $100. So a lot of them are spending large amounts of straight $100, not special fees and things, to go ahead and address those issues that they run into. Plus some of them also have similar things to our $3 fees. Of course, they're all different, but it's nonetheless other sources. One of the big things in the habitat issue was, and a lot of it has to do perhaps that they have got a lot of more public land, or less public land, a lot more private land than we do, is that a lot of them are directly paying landowners to plant green stripping, a lot. Kind of like as we are in Nevada through the NRCS program in certain areas. But that's a really big thing. And it sounds like that's one a lot of them seem there's a lot of success for. Anchor the population model every 3 to 5 years with in-depth surveys and then extrapolations independent of any model and independent of the other personnel. That was the answer that I got from multiple people in my question about what is the best thing you can do to see if your model is actually accurate. Different people to check it. And then you know where you're at. Because if you just use the one model, we really have no idea. Because there's no check. You got it, and it's like anything else, you need to check, you need to balance. I showed up at the Mule Deer meeting, and Wafa Mule Deer Working Group meeting, and the second day of it had been canceled. So I showed up with 4 other commissioners and 2 other staff members from other states. It had been canceled, but we had a good Mule Deer Working Group meeting without the Mule Deer Working Group. It was rather interesting. Actually, 2 of the guys were one of the staff members actually was on the group that was in. But it was rather interesting. I wouldn't talk a lot about the stuff that had come out, and basically things that came out of that. Oh, and also some of this came also from some of the commissioners. was that, you know, if you want to increase your buck population and deer herd, first you have to cut out all doe seasons first. And that came every state that I asked. I asked, what is the first thing you can actively do? And every one of them said, kill your doe season first. And they also said, and there was a couple of them, there's one guy, and he's a commissioner, he's also a former director. He mentioned that, you know, you definitely want to eliminate and always stay away from point class restrictions. You know, 3-point only, 4-point only. And that came from various states. Yeah, we did that before and that was bad. Spike only, you know, bigger, whatever, point class restriction, any kind. It was unanimous. I couldn't find anybody that thought it was a good idea. And that staff members, commissioners, whatever. That was unanimous. Get rid of point class restrictions. Stop your doe hunts first. And then that'll allow you to see what your other problems are. I know we had one of the guys, you know, they're talking about now, it's something very similar to Mr. Wazley was talking about, in that how do you measure carrying capacity? There's things, you know, body fat content is utilizing that as a surrogate for habitat. But then, which tells you that's the best measurement, but then it's very flawed, because it all depends on the environment in the area, unless it's in a controlled, high fenced enclosure, as you know we talked about before with the wood duck thing, or elk wood. Unless it's not in that circumstance, it's a little bit tough. But that is probably the best surrogate for habitat measure out there. Average birth rate I found was interesting. 170 fawns per 100 does. That was a number that was thrown out there, and a couple of guys disagreed with it a little bit, but it wasn't much. But that was actual birth rate when they're being healthy. That's mostly twins. That was interesting. And that came out of the Idaho, and yeah, I remember the Colorado guy, he thought it was like 10 less than that, but it seemed fairly unanimous that, you know, you should have 160 does, or fawns per 100 does born at the birth date. After that, 10 minutes later, things change. But, you know, if things are good, you should have a rapid recovery in deer population. So I said, well, how long would it take to get a deer population back up if you do things? A year. You know, we're talking a year. You should still be, it was amazing if everything was perfect. It has never happened that way, but that was interesting. Anyways, that's not a brief overview, but there's a lot that goes on for meetings. It's a good way to see how other people are, and in general, I'd recommend, if we're going to send a commissioner, send a different one every time. As chairman of a commission, I find how we get it on the agenda. Send a different one every time, get a different perspective, you at least get a different look, you get a different look at all these different commissioners, you see their problems. It's rather fascinating. Thank you.
Well, Ken Mayer for the record, thanks. I'm glad I do have an opportunity to talk to our meetings that we attended seem a little bit different here. Just to clarify the record, Commissioner Raine alluded to corruption potentially, and the groups that sponsored director lunches were groups like Ducks Unlimited, Intermountain West Joint Venture, Recreational Boating and Fishing Foundation, the Archery Trade Association, the Wild Turkey Federation. So all conservation organizations that contribute money to agencies across the nation. The other thing is that there a lot of things did go on at the meeting, at the various subcommittee meetings, as well as the plenary session. Plenary session, there was the two focuses were social media, and the other was large-scale conservation. And they had Ted Turner come in and talk about. He owns 500,000 acres now. Incredible. He's put $1 billion into this thing, and there's a guy that and it was interesting hearing him talk that. The reason he's got so many buffaloes is he kind of liked a buffalo, and he when he had his first little piece of property, he put it in his backyard, and now he's got 50,000-60,000 head. Anyway, but he's dealing with conservation on a large scale, and he had some nuggets from a private person's perspective. The social media, quite frankly, is the way of the future, and they had some experts there to talk about how to implement social media into what we do, especially for hunter retention and recruitment, for just getting the public involved, getting your message out, looking at agency legacy, those kinds of things, how to get young people interested in being a biologist. So that was a very interesting and useful plenary session. There was a very interesting topic that there was a lot of conversation between the directors and the commissioners about the Endangered Species Act, and how the feds are addressing that, as well as ignoring states' rights. And I think that the meetings that I was in, it was ubiquitous across the commissioners and the directors that we probably need to find something from a legal perspective to force the feds' hands to recognize what states' rights are. As an example, if we're going to put sheep on the mountain, they're responsible for the habitat, we're responsible for the animals, and just throwing out the archaeological card or the EA card is not good enough. And I would not be surprised if there is a lawsuit filed by a state agency that will then frame what state rights are once and for all, so that we can get on with business. I also chaired the National Sage Grouse Executive Oversight Committee, and we were standing room only. We had the BLM unveil for the first time their strategy for addressing the regulatory framework for sage grouse, which has been the bugaboo in this whole listing. There are 2 of the 5 listing factors that the service identifies for sage grouse. One was habitat, quality and quantity, and the whole wildfire issue, the conversion, the effects of energy development on core habitat. But the other was the lack of a good regulatory framework to protect sage grouse in perpetuity. BLM owns over 60% of the habitat, and it's really in their shop to be able to figure out how to modify these resource management plans across the West to provide that framework. And they have unveiled that, and we are actively engaged in helping them implement it. In fact, Sean is going to go back here and spend 2 weeks at the latter part of August to be a representative from Nevada, as a representative of WAFWA, to provide those guidelines and help make sure that we get Nevada concerns heard in the development of those plans. The next meeting is going to be the winter meeting, January 5th through the 8th. It will be in San Diego. We normally do it in San Diego or Tucson. Those western states that are up their eyebrows in snow like to come to a warmer place. And then the summer meeting is going to be July 20th through the 25th. That's going to be in Hawaii. So that may be problematic for some states. The prices that they've been able to negotiate with the hotel, it's going to be in Kona on the Big Island, is very comparable to what the prices for rooms were in Montana this year. So, and they're also working on plane fares to try to make it comparable. Of course, when you say, well, where are you going? We're going to Hawaii, that may be the biggest concern. So we'll have to talk about what we've got budgeted for that.
You need some advisory boards.
So, yeah, every cab needs to go, I know, I can hear that now. But there's a lot of things that go on at those meetings, and in fact, there's so many really good subcommittee meetings that are ongoing, it's hard to decide which one you're gonna go to. Rob is with the wildlife protection chiefs, we've got the mule deer committee, we've got the game division chiefs meeting, which they have a whole list of really great issues that they are requesting guidance from the WAFWA directors on which way to go. So very, very useful from my perspective. And Rich's, what we're doing is trying to combine these various meetings. We're a member, Nevada's a member of the Colorado River Fish and Wildlife Council. That was established back in the 40s. I was just past president. They linked that the day and a half before WAFWA, so it was there. You're traveling once. And then on the end of it, the Pacific Flyway Council then connected their Pacific Flyway Council meeting with the duck regs and whatnot on the end of it, so it made it a rather long trip. The other thing I can let you know, like in the mule deer committee that Commissioner Raine mentioned, that you got there the second day, that's why it's important to be there the first day, because we've given instruction to all our subcommittee chairmen that if you can get it done in a day, get it done in a day so you can go home and save that per diem money. So they worked late and got everything done that first day of the meeting. But other than that, it's certainly available for any questions.
Commissioner Rob, go ahead.
Yes, going back to Commissioner Raine's comments about his attendance at WAFA, it seemed like he spent a lot of time on hiring of the director, which the legislature and the governor specifically said we do not have any business in right now. Just we can cancel that, but we really don't have any business in it now. That's their decisions now. And then he referenced the mule deer, the mule deer, the mule deer. And I understand he didn't make the first day of the breakout session, and that's when all the pertinent mule deer information went on. I just want to make sure when the sportsmen of the state of Nevada send a representative to a meeting like this, that we as sportsmen get our dollars worth out of sending a person on a trip like that. And I don't know if we got our money's worth this year.
Commissioner Raine.
Thank you very much. Without looking at the agenda, that might very well be the way you might think, but there are commissioners' committee. And the commissioner committee meets a couple different days. As the director just mentioned, meetings run concurrently. The commissioners' committee ran concurrently with the first day of the Mule Deer Working Group. It's a 2-day meeting. Try to make everything you can. And during the Commissioners Committee, we had basically mule deer population recovery, an overview by Toby Boudreau, Idaho's experiences, and we're going in a couple days with Montana experiences, mule deer population recovery, Colorado experience, mule deer population recovery, Utah's experience, and they went in depth in their plans on how what their different groups are doing to deal with mule deer populations and their reductions, and to think that, oh, yeah, well, you should have gone to the mule deer one. Well, that's what we talked about the majority of the time. Wolves took up a relatively small portion of the second day of that event, which that was actually the only afternoon. The all-day Commissioners Committee was when they had the other committee, so I appreciate it. And one other thing, since I'll just throw it out there, is it was interesting that to raise revenues, there's a couple states out there just pushing non-resident tag fees to the absolute limit of demand. I found that was an interesting methodology. You know, to be nice to the residents, and let's just jack fees up until demand about meets your supply for non-resident tags. And most of them are keeping about the 10% rule for the most part. But that was an interesting, Nevada's got a pretty expensive non-resident tag, but it was interesting to see that that's, a couple states talk about that, and there are a couple states are doing it. Just something to talk.
Okay, any other commission comments, questions on this informational item on WAFA? Okay, looking like there's none. Let's move on to the next agenda item, and that is the law enforcement practices in incidents involving accidental killing of big game animals. Overview of process for determination of penalties. Chief Buonamici. Public comment will be allowed on this item. I want to make sure that we set the scope of what this agenda item is. What we're going to be talking about are basically the protocols when there's an accidental killing of a big game animal. And I guess I would assume that would include if a sportsman or a member of the public. That will include if a non-law enforcement NDOW employee and a law enforcement employee of NDOW. And so those are the groups. And so Chief Buonamici, go ahead.
For the record, Rob Buonamici, Chief Game Warden. The accidental kill issue is one that's been around for eons. Accidents happen. I mean, there's no simpler way to put it. They do happen. The issue then becomes, well, how do you deal with it? And we aren't robots. Game wardens aren't robots. Every situation is different. No matter how similar they sound when you hear them, if you take them as face value, well, incident A, Hunter A killed 2 deer, and he got this. And incident B, a year later, Hunter B kills 2 deer, and this is what happened to him. And it's not the same. That's not fair. And that's usually what we hear. So the issue then becomes, you know, what are we about? We're here to protect the resource, and we're here to meet or exceed public expectations. And then the issue becomes, okay, what's the public expectation, sportsman expectation, when an accident happens? Is their expectation to throw the guy in jail? Is their expectation to just cut him loose? What is that expectation? And the only way to, what we do is we look at it from a fairness, not an equality standpoint, but a fairness standpoint. And by that, what I mean is, given the identical set of circumstances, what we try and do is, a game warden in southern Nevada, for example, runs across a scenario A, he handles it a certain way. A game warden out at Elko runs across scenario A, same situation, handles it pretty much the same. So how do you do that when you're dealing with, 32 field officers around the state, different jurisdictions, different courts with different expectations, different district attorney offices with different expectations? So the way we have chosen to deal with that is through a common philosophy. And we have these discussions at our annual in-service or when we get together occasionally. What is our philosophy when it comes to this type of stuff? How do we arrive at that philosophy? That philosophy is arrived over years and years of experience. Dealing with the hunters themselves that are involved in these situations, dealing with the courts, dealing with the judges. We don't believe in taking the attitude, the philosophy that, hey, you got 2 deer? Hey, 1 deer is illegal. It's no different than the guy who went out and intentionally shot him with a spotlight. We're arresting you or press hard 4 copies, and we'll let the judge sort it out. We don't want to put the honest sportsman that makes a mistake through all that aggravation. To us, that's not right. Many times they come to us and say, hey, I made a mistake. I got 2 elk, 2 sheep, 2 deer. I got the wrong sets of deer. I got a doe instead of a buck and all that. So those are the situations that we're faced with on a fairly routine basis. So what we try and do on those is look at them from the standpoint of accidents happen. These are good people that these accidents are happening to. So there's a kind of a sliding scale that you can envision when it comes to an accident. There's what is truly an accident. There is no way, shape, or form that could have been predicted. The outcome could have been predicted at all. Individual sees a deer, antelope spitter. Sees an antelope and shoots the antelope, bullet goes through the antelope, ricochets off a rock, and hits an antelope 50 yards away and kills it. You know, you can't predict that type of stuff. So, should we hammer that individual? No. Should we even really issue a citation to that individual? Maybe not. I mean, after all, it doesn't happen very often, these true accidents, but they do happen. Kind of like a, 4-year-old kid running out in front of a parked car in a residential area, and you're driving through the residential area using due care, going below the speed limit, and you hit the kid. They don't even get cited. So we keep that in perspective. Then you go up the scale. Accidents, we also include situations where, for example, an individual shoots a doe on a buck tag. Okay, we look at it. What happened? And we look at the physical evidence as well. Example, well, I shot about a 150-yard shot, and there was a herd of deer, and I shot at the buck, and I hit the doe. Okay, how close were the deer together? Oh, they were like all mingled together, kind of running across the side of the mountain. Okay, 150-yard shot. Huh. That's not that far. What kind of gun were you using? 30-30 with open sights. Kind of lobbing them in there. Flock shooting. Is there a degree of negligence? Yes. There is a degree of negligence. So we take that into consideration. Is this individual a poacher? No. Never done that before. Poached anything intentionally, didn't go there with the intent to poach. Wasn't even opportunistic about it and said, hey, I haven't seen game warden around for 2 weeks. I think I'm gonna shoot this deer instead of that deer type of situation. That's not the case. It was an accident, but there was negligence. Very similar to, you're driving to work. Happened to me. I was driving to work one day. Got distracted, looked right when I should have looked left, rear-ended the car. I was at fault. I was negligent. Because I called it in, doesn't mean I shouldn't get cited. No, I was at fault. There was negligence there. So yes, a citation is in order. But we take the liberty of, let's be realistic, let's find a charge on a, minor negligent type accident that they don't lose their hunting privileges. So we'll many times look at what we call our cheat sheet of potential charges. And we'll find something that's 9 demerit points instead of 12. So they don't lose their hunting privileges. And we'll do a minimum bail and set a civil penalty at the low end. And we'll advise the court, the judge, hey, this individual is cooperative, called in, and self-reported, and here's what we did and why. And I can tell you firsthand, the courts, the judges, the DAs appreciate that. Rather than putting the individual, the poor guy, gal that was out there, tried doing the right thing, was negligent or wasn't, but it was an accident. So that's the mindset we're in, the philosophy we instill when we handle these types of cases. Every case is different. I cannot think of 2 cases in my 32 years that were identical. It's either, they may be very similar on the wildlife side, but they're very different on the individuals involved side. One of them may have an attitude, I don't care. I'll log bullets in there all day. You aren't gonna change my mind. Well, you think that's gonna influence our decision a little versus somebody that's crying on the side of the mountain, sick over the whole thing? Yeah, it is. It would influence the court, it would influence the DA. So that's where we come from on the accidental type kills. Accidents happen, it's real world. They're gonna happen no matter how careful people are. And if you're in our shoes responding to these things and you're weighing, you're dealing with somebody that is visibly sick over the issue, you can tell they're definitely upset. We in turn, try and treat those individuals with the utmost respect and sympathy. Do they still get a ticket many times? Yeah, if there's negligence, yeah, they're gonna receive a citation. Back to the vehicle accident analogy. So with that, I'm glad to answer any questions or address any of this, but that, in a nutshell, that's how we deal with it.
One question I have is that when we go from the public to department employees, could you just go over the protocol, as to, is there any difference if let's say it's a non-game warden in-now employee? Is it exactly the same as the public process in the investigation, or are there additional procedures involved? And then contrast that with a department employee who is a game warden.
Glad to. The individual, the private citizen, is treated, handled, everything is handled by Department of Wildlife, by the game wardens, and then the DAs and the court system. So that's how those are handled. We handle those. If it's a department employee that is non-sworn, non-law enforcement, then oftentimes we will do the investigation on it. We will treat them as best we can a citizen, but in all honesty, they're treated harsher from the standpoint of they're in the limelight. Everybody knows that department employee A, did whatever. And so they're in the limelight, they're under a lot of scrutiny. We go the extra mile, not that we don't with the private citizens, but we just really watch, we make sure that we don't assign a game warden to investigate it that works with that individual, knows that individual, which is tough to do in a small agency. It really is. So we take somebody that is probably as much as possible, I'll say non-associated, but doesn't have a relationship with those, a friendship type deal. So we go through those extra steps, and those are the considerations we take there. And then we obviously determine what's the fair thing to do, handle that, and then turn it over to the DA's office and consult with the DA's office and consult with the courts. So we'll do that. That's the extra mile. We go there. With a private citizen, we don't normally consult with the district attorney's office or the courts or anything on those type of issues, because we have a wealth of experience in dealing with that and know what they expect of us. Just like any other law enforcement, a trooper's not gonna write somebody for 58 and a 55 because he knows the DA's gonna laugh at him and the judge is gonna laugh at him unless there's some extenuating circumstance. When it comes to a law enforcement officer that's involved, and we have had those obviously, we even had out-of-state retired game warden involved terms of them, and they did their thing. What we do if it occurs in the state is we find another agency to investigate. So we aren't being accused of, well, you're investigating your own, so therefore you're gonna, you know, cut them a break, or you're gonna overlook some evidence, what have you. The agency we use primarily is U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, because that's what they do. But have we used other agencies in the past? I believe we have. Looked at other agencies or asked them to help on portions. So we keep it out of our hands, turn everything over to them if we have the evidence. If we don't have the evidence, you guys go, you know, get the evidence and do what you normally do. And that's how we handle that. And then that report they write up, the investigative report, is taken to the district attorney. District attorney reviews it. District attorney may or may not ask us questions. You know, sometimes they'll go, well, how do you normally handle these? If they haven't had a lot of experience with them. If they have dealt with wildlife violations quite a bit, they'll normally just say, here's what I want you to do. And we do it, and that individual has the same rights as a private citizen to appear in court, and it's their choice if they wish to appear in court and plead guilty, not guilty, explain it, whatever, just like anybody else. So those are the steps we go through.
Okay, I'll bring it back up to the commission. Any other commissioners have any particular questions? But before we start on these questions, I want to make sure that we understand the scope of this agenda item. This agenda item is not dealing with any particular events, any particular incidents that have occurred. This is a general discussion about the processes and any of the items that Chief Buonamici has spoken about today. I've had consultations with our DAG, and we need to be very careful here that we do not talk about any events. So with that warning, I'd like to have any commissioners that have any questions with regard to the subject matter that Chief Buonamici just spoke about. Go ahead. Anybody have any questions? Any questions? Commissioner Raine.
Thank you. I was hoping to be covered, and it almost wasn't, and it's just basically, if you could go over for us, you've gone over how you make the determination, but now, how does the court, what is the responsibility of the court in determining fines and things, and what is the responsibility of the department? What role does the department have, I mean, in determining whether if it was me, for example, it would be a good one, because I've fortunately never had to see a professional banner, determining whether it was $100 or $500. Do you make that, what role would the greater you of MDOW have in making that determination, and what role does the court have in it? Just kind of.
Yes, glad to answer that. How that works is, for the record, Rob Buonamici, GP. How that works is we will have these conversations through time prior to the seasons, or as a result of an event the previous season, or what have you, or 5 years ago, with the judges, district attorneys, and, hey, we like the way you handled that one, or you kind of wrote that guy for a little much, don't you think you're a little hard on him? We'll get that type of feedback. That occurs. The other thing that occurs, give you an example. We had a situation in White Pine County about 15, 16, 18 years ago, where we had a tremendous amount of elk being shot by deer hunters. Not intentionally, mistakenly. It went on and on and on. I mean, it was the judge, actually it was the DA at the time, finally said, enough's enough. And I want all these charged as a gross misdemeanor. We need to send the message. Okay, so that's what we did. So that's how we handled that situation. So if we get direction from the courts and district attorneys, we follow those directions. There's a lot of times when we're out there, granted, making judgment calls. And that's why this common philosophy is what we try to instill. So under the identical set of circumstances, people are treated pretty darn equally. We're human. Do we always get it right? Nah. I'm here to tell you, sometimes we don't get it 100%. But we give it our best shot. And yeah, this one, you know, we can't go above minimum bail on this. This individual just doesn't deserve it. There was minimal negligence. It wasn't a pure accident. There was some negligence. So why put an honest sportsman that's beating themselves up, physically sick over it, through the ringer and say, well, technically it's a felony, so guess what? We're arresting you and charging you with a felony. And you can deal with the DA and judge. Is that really fair? Is that the right thing to do? We don't believe so. And I don't want our officers treating people that way. We treat everybody with respect. Even the poachers, believe it or not. We treat with respect unless they want to kill us or something, then we do what we need to do. But that's the way it works. That's our philosophy, and that's how we operate. So does that answer your question?
I guess in general, but, so you make a recommendation to them, and then they take it from there, and then they give you feedback? That's just the general process, though.
We have discussions
On the
with the
citation.
district attorneys, for example.
Yeah.
Okay, you know, we run scenarios by them, and they go, you know, and here's, you know, you okay with us doing a minimum bail or, you know, $200 bail or what have you? And they're, you know, yeah. And a lot of times, there are times, because you can't predict every situation. They're all different. You can't predict them all. So there are many times when we are making decisions out there that, not this one, it's not a felony, it's not a gross misdemeanor, but it's extremely negligent. So, you know, we're gonna put $500, we're gonna explain to the DA what we did, and then the DA can change it if they so desire and go, you know, Rob, that was a little, no. We'll go down to 300 on that, or what have you. That's the system, that's the checks and balances. But I don't want to be put in a position where our game wardens are forced to just say, tough, it's a law, technically it's a felony, you go sort it out. You go through the expense of getting an attorney. I don't think that's the expectation of the sportsman, of the public. Their expectation is somebody goes out there and intentionally poaches, hammer, and throw the book at them. And that's the expectation, I believe. And, you know, if I get feedback today that, no, we don't want you guys arresting poachers, then, you know, we'll look at it a little different, but that's our job. That's what you pay us for.
Okay, Commissioner McGinnis has a question.
No, I don't know, Commissioner Raine did that. You know, our office, my job that pays, we have, when we issue citations, basically we go out and we have the ability to set a certain bail amount up to a certain amount, okay, depending on what kind of a citation it is. It's all civil, I guess. So we have the ability to set a bail, and then you add to it the administrative cost for the jurisdiction that you're in, and you give them their ticket, and they sign on the bottom, which basically is a promise to appear. They're basically saying, I will appear. If I don't, then I'm gonna have a warrant put out for my arrest, on and on and on. They show up in court, And the judge has the latitude to assess the fine up or down from that particular point, from that particular level that was set. Is that how the process works, basically?
That's how it works in our normal, we have what they call bail schedule. So we catch somebody fishing without a license, 3 fish over
Right
limit,
down the
hunting no
street.
license, we just go by the bail schedule on that. Unless there are, something is accidental, but, it's not an accident that you didn't go buy your fishing license usually. It's because you're trying to get away. So there, rarely does that, is it truly, I forgot, sometimes it is. So don't confuse that with, we're out there just putting numbers on the citation, whatever we feel like. That's not the case, we're just talking, I was just specific to accidents, big game accidents, since that was the topic. But, the other stuff, there's bail schedules that we follow and adhere to unless there's extenuating circumstances to do different. For example, I had an individual at one of the high mountain lakes that I apprehended with 63 fish over the limit. I issued the citation for the 63 fish over the limit and called it good. 2 years later, got the same individual with 48 fish over the limit. Guess what? Trip to jail. Got booked. So, that wasn't on the bail schedule. Book them. But that's what happened, and the judge, supported that 110% and upped the fine.
Sounds like there's a lot of judgment that goes into all of this, and so anyway, Commissioner Trump.
Chief Buonamici, I'm going to try to do this within the limits that have been placed on me by the chairman. There was an incident not too long ago where a experienced hunter with one tag accidentally shot an extra animal, and I made a comment at the time that we should discuss this before it got in the papers, and we didn't, and it made the papers, and the article came out was somewhat different than the actual circumstances. And I managed to go ahead and get a report of their statements and everything, and the problem is, I can put myself right in that man's shoes. He was using a borrowed weapon, and it's just like all the weapons I have, none of the trigger pulls the same one of them.
Commissioner Trump.
And he accidentally.
Commissioner Trump, just let me interrupt here. Dag's advised me that we can't even talk about a particular case even though we don't mention names. Okay, so you're gonna have to frame this in a different way, in more general terms.
Anyway, I couldn't find anything with the man, anything wrong. I could sympathize with him and see everything he went through. But it's, what I'm leading up to is perception that it was like it was covered up because we weren't told about it, and nobody read it about the paper. So it's perception now. This may just be an offhand joke, but I think it was one of those commissioners that did it. They stored them, and we were out there with a machine gun slaughtering animals. So it's all, so I can't, since I'm restricted to what I can say, is that the report I have here of what they did and what they said was somewhat different than what the newspaper said, and so they, were basically judged, or prejudged because of our lack of information that we weren't given. So we could give it out to the public, say, hey, this is what really happened, not necessarily what the newspaper did. And I received a bunch of emails over this, which I can't say.
What I can respond to there is, it's just a fact of life. The more visible your position, the more scrutiny you're under. That's just a fact of life. If a game warden, private citizen does something, average hunter, a real big deal. Somebody on the, a board of one of the sporting organizations, a little bigger deal. Department employee, a little bigger deal. Game warden, even a bigger deal. Director, commissioner, big deal. You know, it's just, what can I say? It's a fact of life. We're gonna be under the scrutiny. You know, chief game warden busted for, you know, that's just a fact of life.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, now this is an informational, this one I have to take public comment on, but I have a question. What time are we allowed to stay here? Do we have any?
And the door's automatically locked, we just walk out. She said we don't have to lock up or anything, we're fine
Okay.
as far as that. But yeah, after 6 or 7, is it 6 or 7?
Yeah, we can't.
I'll bust the overtime budget.
The door's locked out.
Yeah, at 6.
Okay, if they're gonna lock the doors from the outside, then that means the public can't come in to deal with, you know, some of these other informational items. What our DAG's recommending is that we take, I guess what we'll do is we'll go ahead and take public comment on this particular item, and then take public comment, the general public comment, and we'll move the rest of the informational items to tomorrow. Anyway, do we need to do that by motion?
Mr. Chairman, I mean, we're talking 6 or 7? Maybe we just roll through as best we can and see where we're at.
Well, we need to leave enough time for public comment on this. We need to see how much.
Do the doors lock at 6 or 5?
6.
At 6. So the doors lock at 6, no one can come in after 6. So we got an hour and 10 minutes before that happens.
Okay, then maybe what we do, maybe we solve this problem by, after we take public comment on this informational item, and then we move to public comment